Rumors moved through the trenches like a second, invisible artillery. A whisper could cross a battlefield faster than any courier, carrying promises of impossible protection. Soldiers, starved for control in a world that erased it, clung to any fragment that sounded like an edge, a charm tucked in a pocket, a trick taught by a man who swore he'd survived because of it, a pattern to bullets that didn't exist. Under relentless blasts and fractured command lines, logic thinned, and instinct filled the empty space with whatever sounded like survival. Myths didn't feel like lies out here. They felt like lifelines woven from fear and hope in equal measure, tightening around every decision. And in that tightening, the real danger quietly took shape, waiting to reveal itself next. The helmet felt like the last solid promise a man could wear, its cold curve pressed against the skull, giving the illusion of a barrier strong enough to deny death itself. Word spread that it could stop a rifle round, that the steel would catch the impact like a shield from some older, simpler war. But physics has no mercy for belief. A bullet traveling nearly a kilometer per second carries enough energy to turn curved manganese steel into a fragile skin. Even when it failed to penetrate, the shockwave could liquefy thought, snapping the mind before the metal even cracked. Yet soldiers stepped from cover trusting that thin bowl of steel, misjudging distances, exposing themselves for seconds too long. In those moments, the truth of ballistics carved itself into the battlefield, waiting to challenge the next illusion. Snow looked soft, harmless, almost protective compared to the metal shredding cold that ruled the front. Some swore that digging into it worked like insulation, that the frozen world could somehow shelter a human body from itself. But snow is a thief, disguised as a blanket. The moment a soldier burrowed in, moisture crept into fabric and skin, accelerating conduction until body heat bled away in silent increments. Manuals written for Arctic units warned of this, but few on the front lines ever saw those pages. Improvisation replaced instruction, and exhaustion overruled caution. Fingers blackened first, then toes, then the mind as hypothermia blurred thought into something slow and strangely peaceful. Long before the enemy arrived, the cold had already claimed its position, preparing to take whoever trusted the snow a little too deeply. The pools inside fresh craters shimmered with a deceptive clarity, as if the violence that carved them had somehow purified the water left behind. Soldiers approached them with trembling canteens, repeating the belief that soil acted as a natural filter, that the earth itself strained away danger. But the ground was saturated with decay, churned with bacteria, and laced with the chemical ghosts of high explosives. Every sip carried an unseen weight of pathogens waiting to detonate inside the gut. Fear of dehydration blurred judgment, turning contaminated puddles into false salvation. Hours later came the cramps, the fever, the spiraling weakness that spread through units faster than gunfire. In many theaters, dysentery stalked the ranks more effectively than any enemy patrol, tightening its hold as desperation deepened. They sprinted across open fields, believing motion itself could outsmart a trained rifleman. The zigzag run was whispered as a clever trick, a way to break a sniper's aim by becoming unpredictable. But human movement is painfully easy to map. Each change of direction telegraphed through shifting shoulders and hips, long before the feet committed. A sniper didn't need to chase the body, only the pattern. Physics favored the still eye over the moving target, and every sudden turn cost precious speed, stretching exposure into long, lethal seconds. What felt like cunning often became a choreographed path toward the inevitable crack of a distant rifle. Overconfidence fed the loop, pushing men to gamble their lives against equations already solved in the dirt beneath them. While the battlefield waited for the next miscalculation, snow tempted the desperate with its clean, effortless water waiting to be swallowed. But every mouthful was a hidden transaction the body could rarely afford. To melt snow internally, a soldier's core had to surrender precious heat, burning calories already stretched thin by hunger and fear. Each handful lowered internal temperature by degrees that seemed insignificant, until shivering blurred into confusion. Thought slowed, hands fumbled, and the thin line between exhaustion and hypothermia dissolved in the dark. What felt like hydration often became a silent drain on strength, stealing warmth faster than the body could rebuild it. By dawn, some were found curled beneath their coats, unaware that the snow they trusted had quietly taken its final payment. They waited for a green cloud, a yellow haze, a sharp sting in the air, something cinematic, something obvious The myth that poison gas announced itself became a quiet permission to breathe freely a little longer, but many agents dispersed as invisible vapors, slipping through trenches in concentrations too low to smell yet strong enough to scar lungs on contact. New recruits, rushed through training, rarely learned the chemistry behind these unseen threats, and veterans clung to denial as a way to keep panic contained. Delay became deadly. Men paused, hesitated, rationalized the faint irritation in their throats, telling themselves it was cold air or cordite residue. By the time masks snapped into place, the damage had already begun, a slow-burning injury settling deep where no one could see it, waiting to surface when escape was no longer possible. Machine guns carried reputations as fragile monsters, powerful but eager to melt themselves into useless scrap if pushed too hard. Soldiers repeated warnings that a few bursts too many would warp the barrel or seize the action, turning the weapon against its own crew. But the true thresholds were far higher, managed by water jackets, quick-change barrels, and practice drills designed to keep the weapon fighting long after nerves began to fray. The real danger wasn't overheating, it was hesitation. Moments when the gun should have roared instead fell into silence as crews second-guessed every trigger pull. In those gaps, enemy movement flourished, and entire squads lost the advantage they never realized they were safe to use, leaving the field poised for consequences far greater than a warm barrel. They believed tanks lumbered with predictable blindness, as if the armored beasts moved through battle wrapped in fixed pockets of ignorance. Soldiers memorized rumored angles the periscopes couldn't reach, convinced they could slip between steel plates and survive. But a tank was never static. Periscopes swept, turrets rotated with grinding patience, and inside the hull, a crew spoke and clipped, urgent commands that brought every weapon to bear on shifting threats. One wrong assumption, one step into a supposed safe zone, and a man found himself beneath treads that didn't slow or in the narrow cone of a coaxial gun already aligned to fire. Combat machines learned the battlefield faster than any myth could account for, reshaping danger with every turn of armored gears as the illusion of safety dissolved under their shadow. Rivers looked like freedom-moving water, open space, a path unclaimed by enemy fire. In the chaos of retreat, men threw themselves into currents, believing anything was safer than the exposed ground behind them. But water follows its own physics, indifferent to desperation. Even shallow crossings hid undercurrents strong enough to twist ankles, drag gear, and pull exhausted bodies under. Cold bit faster than bullets, locking muscles within minutes, turning armor, rifles, and soaked packs into anchors. Entire units vanished in rivers that seemed calm from the bank, their panic feeding the current's pull. In those moments, nature became an executioner without sound or warning, tightening its grip as fleeing soldiers learned too late that escape routes aren't always on land. Darkness felt like a cloak, thick enough to swallow every mistake. Soldiers trusted it instinctively, stepping into night with the belief that the absence of light granted automatic invisibility. But the human eye doesn't need clarity to detect danger, only contrast. A moving silhouette against a star-washed sky was as stark as ink on paper. Sound traveled farther in the cold night air, each breath and footstep unfolding like a signal, and the enemy listened. Flares burst overhead, igniting the world in sudden white fire. Tracers stitched the dark, mapping movement with merciless accuracy, while hidden listening posts marked positions long before contact. Relying on night instead of tactics turned concealment into exposure, leaving the battlefield to determine what the shadows would reveal next. Instinct whispered promises. Soldiers wanted to believe that danger could be felt, that survival could be guessed, that intuition would warn them in time. But industrial war made those instincts obsolete. Steel, gas, cold, and velocity didn't negotiate with human feeling. They operated by rules older and harsher than fear. Myths rose to fill the gap, shaped by fragments of science overheard, by desperate hope, by the need to make chaos feel navigable. Yet every belief untested by reason became a trap, guiding men toward decisions that felt right but ended wrong. Survival here wasn't a reflex, it was a discipline, a cold recalibration of mind against emotion. And in the end, identity itself hinged on one truth: in a world built to kill, the deadliest mistake was trusting the wrong idea. ****